What's good, YouTube? Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart for Vernon Speak Sports Auburn. Here on the podcast today, man, it is an exciting time on the plains of Auburn. It is the first day of training camp, and oh man, it's been a interesting journey. Started this thing with the Purdue game. Did some coverage on that, man, and I nailed it as far as predictions and projections. Felt like Gus Malzahn calling plays was going to make all the difference. It made more of a difference than I ever would have expected. This has been a great run. You know, you look at the men's basketball team. Well, actually recruiting, had some very, very successful situations with recruiting as well. Signing, of course, Bo Nix and Owen Papo. Missed out on George Pickens, but got some guys that you really wanted to get. Especially you're looking at Zion Puckett and, Jaron Handy, Charles Moore, all those different guys, Mark Anthony Richards, and, of course, DJ Williams, who had the opportunity to play in the spring game, had the privilege of early enrollee. Got a lot of good kids in this signing class. Also, you look at the Auburn program athletically as a whole, with the Auburn men's basketball team making an improbable run, in the NCAA, starting with that game. I thought about the game when they beat Georgia last second, and they started to make their run. They started piling on the wins, and then at a certain point, that belief factor started to set in, and the Auburn Tigers did the improbable, beating all the blue bloods, Kansas, Kentucky, and North Carolina. I thought that was absolutely incredible for the Tigers, and even in the beginning of the season, from a perception standpoint, having a good showing out in the Maui Invitational, actually pushing Duke to the limit after starting out a little rocky there. And then on to the men's to the baseball team, who makes it to the College World Series, and Big Cat Weekend, which brought a lot of recruits, a lot of perception to the program. Really started an insurmountable amount of momentum for the Auburn Tigers, and it's just been positive after positive after positive, and it leads us to this point as the training camps begin. Of course, there is questions as far as positional questions, but you got to think about it. A lot of the questions, a lot of the activity over the offseason makes it a lot easier to answer those questions. You think about, none of us can say that at the beginning of January, when we found out that Marlon Davidson, Derek Brown, and Nick Cole was coming back, we were like, what exactly is going on? What did the coaching staff do to get these guys back? And that was a huge thing, because, one of the question marks now is, whether who's going to replace Montavious Atkinson. Who's going to replace Dontavious Russell? Now, I'm going to tell you this. I would rather have to answer that question with the situation that I have now versus the situation that Auburn thought they were going to be in prior to. Because if Derek Brown would have just left, you're talking about two huge voids to fill, and you're talking about a very youthful linebacker situation. So I would rather have to, no matter who the guy is, I would rather have to answer that question with the totality of what I have going on now versus what was thought to have been back then, because that was very questionable. That opened up a lot of doors. That opened up a lot of opportunities to where you can, really play some options there. So very, very good situation for the Auburn Tigers on the defensive line. Now, one of my main questions is, a lot of people like to talk about the 10 burning questions position wise and things like that. One of my questions is the Auburn coaching staff. What has the Auburn coaching staff done during the offseason to put these guys in the best possible situation to be successful? I just really want, especially considering that you have a lot of guys who have made a decision to come back to solidify their legacy as football players. Because, of course, I think Nick Coe and Marlon Davidson and Derek Brown felt like they had some unfinished business. Because I said on a podcast yesterday, if those guys were to leave, they would not have any. I mean, yeah, we will remember them as good football players, but I just don't think we will remember them as great football players, like how we revere the Nick Fairleys, the Jeff Hollands, and things of that nature. So I think these guys, and you can listen to it in Marlon Davidson's interview. He said, "This is my team." Encountering KJ Britt, not necessarily doing it in a demeaning kind of way, but he said, this is my team. And I feel like with Derek Brown, that's one of the reasons why he came back, because he had the opportunity to have his team. He couldn't have his team with the wealth of experience that was around him. You're talking about Deshaun Davis, Montavious Atkinson, Darrell Williams, and, being in the shadow of Dontavius Russell, and even years prior, Trey Matthews. Now Derek Brown and company have the opportunity to signature their team and be leaders on their particular team. And I think that's a phenomenal opportunity. And when you go into this fall camp and you have the wealth of experience and talent that Derek Brown and Marlon Davidson and some of those other guys have, it's going to rub off on the new talent. And it's going to be, very exciting. Like, say, listening to Marlon Davidson, I mean, he's a very mature young man that knows his football team, that knows what he's talking about as it relates to the football program. Now, like I said before, my thing is, what have the coaches done to put these players in a unique position to meet their goals, both, scholastically and on the gridiron? Over the offseason, Auburn acquired a new offensive coordinator, Kenny Dillingham, also brought back former assistant coach in Wesley McGriff. And, those were huge hires. Also brought in Carnell Williams as a running backs coach. Huge hires for the Auburn Tigers. Now, a lot of folks ask me, well, what does Kenny Dillingham bring to the table? Honestly, we don't know. Just as we probably didn't know what Nick Saban brought to the table his initial year as a football coach. But one thing he does bring to the table is what you need to bring to the table as a new coach is a wealth of potential. A lot of energy, a lot of desire, a lot of passion. He did a good job at Memphis, but that's, only 2 years worth of sample size. So it's really hard to say what a guy who is only, 5 or 6 years removed from being a college student himself, it's hard to dictate what he will bring to the table. But I do know that he knows the opportunity that he has in front of him. And he has an opportunity in front of him that's not given to many, to be an offensive coordinator at less than 30 years old. And I do believe in the, from a genuine standpoint, that he wants to put forth the effort to maximize that opportunity. And so far, there has been nothing negative that has come about. He did, from all accounts, help and assist the game plan for the Music City Bowl for the Auburn Tigers. And we just have to see. We don't know. We don't know what he's going to bring to the table. No more than we knew that Kevin Steele in 2016 was going to have a depleted Auburn defense with consecutive years of teams scoring less than 20. So, also, one of the questions that I have is with Cody Burns. Cody Burns has, done an excellent job on the recruiting trail and bringing some really, really nice talent to the Tigers. Is it a situation where now that everything is solid, Gus Malzahn is back calling plays, now we will see the wide receiver talent accentuated this year? That's something that I really want to see. Also, one question that I do have when it comes to the coaching staff is Travis Williams, co-defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. He's in a situation, guys, as a relatively young coach, starting to gain some tenure, starting to gain some experience. But for the first time in his career, he's having to start out with a whole slate of new linebackers. Now, one thing I like about this situation for Travis Williams is that when you go back to 2004, when he was a linebacker for the Auburn Tigers, we didn't know what they were going to bring in 2004 either. Because if you guys remember, in 2004, that was when the exodus of the Dontarius Thomas and Carlos Dansby left to go pro and those other things. And, we really didn't know what the Auburn Tigers roster was going to look like as it relates to the linebacker core. Okay. You talk about on defense having to replace guys like, Dontarius Thomas, guys like Carlos Dansby, and then you think about, who is going to succeed these guys. That year you lost Dontarius Thomas, Carlos Dansby, a very good defensive lineman in DeMarco McNeil, Reggie Torbar. I mean, who would have thought that in 2004, that with all that Auburn lost, that they would actually have the potential to potentially play for a national championship, because there was a wealth of talent lost that year, especially at the linebacker position. So that the situation that Auburn is in at linebacker right now takes me back to that particular time when Auburn lost Dontarius Thomas and Carlos Dansby, and having to replace those guys with relatively inexperienced guys. And the funny part about it is when you look at the linebackers, they're very similar size-wise to what Auburn had in 2004 in that particular run. But a good thing was the fact that Auburn had a very, very good defensive line that returned in 2004 that helped anchor that Auburn linebacker core and helped them garnish some talent. I mean, not necessarily talent, but garnish some confidence down the stretch to where they weren't necessarily a bad, we wouldn't call them a tandem, but they weren't bad. They were very sound at the linebacker position in 2004. So that's one of the questions that I have even for Travis Williams. Will he be able to borrow back from that experience and really piece some things together for the Auburn Tigers? Also, when we look at the Auburn coaching staff this year, there were some setbacks, in my opinion, on defense. Kevin Steele, during that stretch between Mississippi State and Alabama, arguably one of the more questionable stretches of his career as an Auburn Tiger defensive coordinator. During that particular stretch, Auburn allowed, about close to 500 yards per game, 28 points per game, helped teams stay on the field with the first downs. How will he improve the stretch of the SEC? Well, I believe he will be able to do it because he's going to have a lot more experience on the defensive line, even more experience on the defensive line. These guys are a cohesive unit now. I think you're going to have some upgrades in the secondary, especially when you talk about that nickel position that was really questionable, was a deciding factor in a lot of the games on last year. Guys that were just grossly out of place at that nickel position. So. And also a lot of depth at that secondary to the point where those guys are talented enough to where you can move them around. You don't just have to let them sit back. I'm talking about Jamian Sherwood and Smoke Monday. You don't just have to have them sitting behind Jeremiah Denson and Jeremiah Denson and Daniel Thomas. You can actually utilize their talent. So I think, Kevin Steele is in a great position to redeem that particular stretch. And one thing that's going to help him out, too, is with the fact that Gus Malzahn is calling plays this year. Usually when Gus Malzahn is the play caller, the benefit is points scored and time of possession. Give you guys some rest. Because even with the defense, with only having about, having to play on the field about 30 minutes a lot of games, 30 minutes or more, you know, having a lot more time of possession from the offense is going to be very, very crucial. So I think the coaching staff has a unique challenge ahead of them. One thing about it, give these guys who have decided to come back, who could have gone and, just went on to the NFL, but came back because of an opportunity to be successful, give these guys a viable opportunity to accentuate on that success. And I think, you'll have a pretty decent season. Also, too, we look at the guys who are coming in. Man, Jerry and Handy has really garnished a lot of praise among his teammates. I think if you get an endorsement from Marlon Davidson, that definitely says a lot for the Auburn Tigers. And one thing about Jaron Handy that I like is he has the size, about 6'5", 278 pounds. He's very agile. And I think he will be a guy, he along with Charles Moore, are guys who can have an immediate impact for the Tigers, especially in the reserve role. You start looking at that stretch between Texas A&M and LSU. You're definitely going to have some depth at the line of scrimmage. And I think these guys can be kind of like how Carl Lawson was in 2013. Providing that depth and maybe making some big plays down the stretch to actually put Auburn in a position to be very successful. Also looking at Mark Anthony Richards, who didn't have the luxury of spring camp, will be there. Kamar Bell, offensive lineman, looking to solidify some things there with the offensive line. So looking forward to some great things for the Auburn Tigers. A very, very exciting day. One thing about it, we just want to give a shout out to all the players on this team, who are working diligently. You talk about the work ethic of a student athlete, especially on the Power 5 level, is unbelievable. And to have to do that transition, nutrition-wise, fitness-wise, all those things that you have to do to immediately transfer over to the Power 5 ranks, I think is phenomenal and worthy of some degree of praise, especially from the fan base who like to get on social media and blast these guys when half of them don't know, what it takes really to be a student athlete, especially on the Power 5 level. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for Vernon Speaks Sports Auburn. On this channel, ladies and gentlemen, it is always great to be an Auburn Tiger on the plains of Auburn, especially today, with it being the first day of training camp. The battle cry is War Eagle. Best wishes to the Auburn Tigers, who have the Advocare Classic looming large right around the corner, less than a month away. Football season is here, guys. War Eagle.